The wind on Greyfong Mountain didn't whisper. It screamed. Cutting across the jagged cliffs, it howled like something alive, tearing at clothing, stinging exposed skin with needles of ice. Even in daylight, the storm clouds hovered low, swallowing the upper ridge, turning everything into a world of gray. And that's where they left her. Sergeant Mira Lane, Army Ranger, mountain warfare specialist, and the one person the unit always counted on to finish the impossible. But today, she wasn't with her unit. Today, she was the mission. She leaned against a boulder on the ridgeline, breath fogging in the frozen air. Her hands were tied behind her back with steel cord. Blood dripped from a cut near her eyebrow. Her face was pale, scraped, and bruised. But her eyes? Sharp. Focused. Alive. Down the ridge, 2 armed insurgents shoved her forward and spat something in their language. She didn't need to understand their words. She understood the intent. They weren't planning to kill her. Not yet. They wanted her to vanish. To freeze. To disappear into the endless white. A message to her team. A warning. Mira stumbled as one of them kicked her knee from behind. She fell onto the snow-covered rock, cough shaking her body. The taller insurgent crouched, grabbed her chin, and whispered in broken English, "Your rangers won't come. No one climbs this mountain in a storm." She stared at him, expression flat. "I would." He laughed sharply. "Makes you a fool." He stood, and without another word the 2 men left. Moving down the ridge fast, confident, certain the storm would do the rest. And just like that, she was alone. Trapped on a peak famous for swallowing climbers whole. Mira closed her eyes, letting the cold air burn her lungs. Her fingers flexed behind her back, feeling for give in the cord. Nothing. She wasn't getting out of this with strength. She needed time. Time the storm wouldn't give. She exhaled through clenched teeth. "Rangers, if you're out there, hurry!" But even as she said it, she didn't believe rescue was possible. The map in her mind told the truth. Greyfong Peak was considered unclimbable during a storm. Especially without ropes. Especially without gear. Especially in the dark. Which was coming fast. She wasn't naive. She wasn't weak. Rangers weren't built that way. But Mira Lane was stranded at 11,000 feet. In freezing winds. With no weapon. No gear. And no hope of self-rescue. Her only chance. Her rangers. But they had no idea where she was. Or so she thought. Down the mountain, Ranger Base Camp. Below, in a sheltered valley 2 kilometers south, Captain Rourke burst through the tent flap, cold wind blasting into the operations center. "Satellite feed confirms it. She's on the peak," he barked. All eyes snapped to the screen. A blurry drone shot image. Mira. Kneeling on the ridge. Hands bound. Storm closing in around her. Corporal Diaz cursed. "Sir, that climb, no gear means suicide." Rourke didn't respond. Because he already knew the truth. Greyfong wasn't just a mountain. It was the mountain. The one every ranger knew. The one used to break soldiers and winter training. The one they climbed only with full gear, ropes, and anchors. Climbing it barehanded? "You can't," the medic whispered. "Nobody can." Rourke's jaw tightened. "Nobody, except us." Diaz stared. "You're not thinking." Rourke grabbed his gloves, slinging them on. "She saved my life in Cunard. She saved yours in Lebanon. She saved half this unit more times than we deserve." He zipped his jacket, eyes burning. "I'm not letting Greyfong take her." A beat. Silent. Cold. Heavy. Then every ranger stood. "All right," Diaz growled. "Let's climb the damn mountain." Back on the peak, Mira fights the cold. Mira pressed her cheek against the stone, letting it ground her. Her legs were shaking. Her breath came sharp and thin. The storm's edge crept closer, whipping her hair sideways. Her fingers moved again behind her back. Still nothing. Her lips tightened. She began rubbing the cord on the rock behind her, sawing it against a jagged point. Slow. Quiet. controlled. But the cord didn't fray. It was steel. The storm roared louder, swallowing the peak. She whispered to herself, "Stay awake, stay awake." Then, a sound. A sound she almost didn't believe. Distant. Faint. Barely there over the wind. A voice. A male voice shouting against the storm. "Mira!" Her heart slammed in her chest. No. Impossible. Nobody could climb Grey Fong in a storm. Nobody. Except. "Mira, hold on!" Her breath left her in a sharp gasp. "Rourke!" she whispered. Then more voices. Boots crunching snow. Shadows climbing over rocks with bare hands, using cracks and ledges like mountaineers possessed. 10 rangers. No ropes. No equipment. No fear. They were climbing like the mountain belonged to them. For her. Myra's eyes flooded. Not with weakness. With fire. She straightened despite the cold. She'd hold on. Because her rangers were coming. The storm on Grey Fong didn't wait. It hit fast, like a living thing determined to erase everything on the mountain. Snow blasted sideways. Wind tore through the cliffs. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. And the rangers kept climbing. Bare hands gripping frozen rock. Boots searching for invisible footholds. Breath freezing into ice on their beards and collars. They weren't supposed to survive this. But then, rangers never asked what they were supposed to do. They asked what needed to be done. And Mira Lane needed them. The ridge below the peak. Captain Rourke slammed his palm into a jagged crack and pulled himself upward, muscles burning. Snow stung his face, but he didn't slow. Behind him, Corporal Diaz fought to keep his balance as a gust nearly ripped him off the edge. "Wind's getting worse," Diaz yelled. Rourke didn't look back. "If you fall, climb back up. That your idea of motivation, sir? Works on you." Diaz grinned grimly and pushed on. Further down, Private Hensley slipped on a sheet of ice and dropped 2 meters. He slammed into a lower rock shelf, gasping. Rourke leaned over the ledge. "You good?" Hensley coughed. "Not dead yet. That's the spirit." He kept moving. There was no rope. There was no gear. There was no fallback plan. Just the mountain. And Mira. The enemy watches. Down the ridge, the insurgent spotter raised a pair of binoculars, squinting through the blowing snow. He saw shadows. 1, 2, 3. No more. Figures climbing in the storm. Climbing fast. His mouth opened in disbelief. He grabbed his radio. "Command, you won't believe this. The Americans, they're climbing Grey Fong." Static. Then a voice. "Impossible. No one climbs in that weather. I'm looking at them. They're halfway up already." A pause. "Kill them before they reach the peak." The spotter swallowed. "How?" "Use the ridge guns." The man turned, staring at the 2 mounted DSHK heavy machine guns positioned on the lower cliff. They weren't meant for altitude fire. But today, nothing was normal. He waved to his gunners. "Fire at the climbers! Now!" The first heavy gun roared. The mountain echoed the sound, deep, violent, endless. Bullets chewed into rock, spraying shards across the cliff face. The rangers ducked, hugging the mountain. Diaz yelled. "They set up guns on the ridge? Who the hell brings a machine gun to a storm?" Rourke spat snow. "People who don't want us reaching the top." Another burst tore through the air. 1 round sparking inches from Hensley's hand. "Move!" Rourke roared. "We climb now!" The rangers surged upward. Back on the peak, Mira hears the gunfire. Mira jerked upright as the thunder of machine gun fire rumbled through the storm. Her pulse spiked. No, they didn't. They were shooting at her team. Her jaw clenched. Her breath shook. She twisted harder, scraping the steel cord against the stone. Her wrists burned. The cord tore into her skin. But then... snap! The steel gave way. Her hands flew free. She didn't waste a second. She grabbed the cord, wrapped it around her forearm, and pushed herself up, staggering against the wind. She looked down the mountain. Flashes. Muzzle bursts. Snow exploding around climbing figures. Her rangers were fighting the peak. And the enemy. At the same time. Move! She shouted into the storm, even knowing they couldn't hear her. Her body shook from cold, but she forced herself to stand tall at the ridge, searching for anything she could use. Then she saw it. The insurgents who left her weren't far. They were returning. Two silhouettes emerging through the storm. Rifles raised. They had realized she escaped. The mountain battle. Down below, the rangers pushed the impossible. Diaz swung around a jutting boulder, boots slipping, fingers numb. A burst of DSHK fire ripped past him, carving a trench in the snow inches from his foot. "They're trying to cut us off!" Diaz shouted. Rourke didn't answer. He was already accelerating upward, climbing like a man possessed. A round shattered the stone above him, dusting his hair with snow. He didn't slow. One more pull. One more ledge. One more impossible move. Because Mira was up there. The Rangers reached the first gun. Private Hensley reached the lower ridge first. The gunner swung the machine gun toward him. But Hensley threw himself into a shoulder roll just as a burst ripped the ground where he'd been standing. He hit the next rock, pushed off it, and launched himself at the gunner with a roar. They crashed into the snow. The gunner grabbed a knife. Hensley slammed his elbow into the man's jaw. Then again. Then again. Snow turned red. Diaz climbed up beside him. "You good?" Hensley wiped blood from his lip. "I really hate this mountain." Diaz grabbed the machine gun and swung it toward the second one across the ridge. "Cover the captain." He fired. The second gunner dove behind cover. The Rangers surged upward again. Nothing stopped them. Not bullets. Not the storm. Not the mountain. Back on the peak, Mira makes her stand. The two insurgents reached Mira. "You should have frozen by now," one hissed. She didn't move. She didn't speak. Her eyes locked on their rifles. Her brain calculating. Wind direction. Distance. Foot position. Timing. She waited for one step. One shift. One opening. And when it came, she moved. Fast as the storm itself. She slammed her head into the first man's nose. His scream lost to the wind. She snatched his rifle, twisted, and fired a burst into the second. He fell instantly. The first tried to swing his knife. Mira sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, twisted, and flipped him over her knee. He hit the snow hard, unconscious. She stood alone again. Alive. Armed. Burning with purpose. She turned toward the cliff and shouted, "Rangers! I'm here!" And somewhere below the storm. They heard her. The Rangers heard Myra's voice. Faint, ripped apart by the wind. But real. Diaz froze mid-climb. "Sir, that was her." Rourke didn't answer. He simply climbed faster. The peak was close now. 20 meters up, maybe less. A narrow, broken cliff line guarding it like a fortress. But the enemy wasn't finished. As soon as the Rangers neared the upper ridge, a burst of rifle fire tore down at them, ricocheting off the stone in sprays of sparks and ice. More insurgents had formed a defensive ring around the top. They weren't here when Mira was left alone. They had arrived to kill the rescuers. Diaz gritted his teeth. "More hostiles! At least 6. Rourke's voice was low, steady. "Then we take the ridge. Move!" Another burst hammered the rock inches from his hand. Hensley yelled, "Sir, we need cover! We're exposed out here!" Rourke looked up at the overhanging cliff. "No. We need momentum." He dug his fingers into a crack and hauled himself up with a surge of strength that didn't look human. Diaz stared. "That man's insane." "Then follow him," Hensley said, climbing after the captain. "Mira holds the peak. Mira crouched behind a jagged boulder, rifle steady, breath steaming in the freezing air. Her wrists were bleeding, but her grip didn't shake. She peeked around the rock. 6 insurgents lined the ridge edge, firing down at the climbing rangers. Another 2 were setting up a final machine gun position behind them. They were turning the entire peak into a kill zone. Myra's jaw tightened. If they finish that gun, Rourke won't make it. She moved. Fast. Silent. Low. Snow crunched under her boots as she crossed to a better angle. The storm masked her steps. She raised the rifle. Target 1, machine gunner. 3-round burst. He dropped. The loader spun. Mira shot him through the shoulder. He collapsed behind a rock, screaming. The insurgents on the ridge turned, confused. She's alive? One shouted. Mira stepped behind a new rock and fired again, forcing them to duck. She didn't need to win. She just needed to keep them busy. Long enough for her rangers to reach her. The rangers' final ascent. Rourke reached the last stretch. A steep, sheer rise of frozen granite. Bullets hammered the cliff. Stone chipped away. Shards sliced his cheek. He didn't blink. Diaz! Hensley! On my 6! He shouted. Diaz caught up beside him. Sir, this is a vertical wall. Rourke gripped a tiny outcrop, tested it, then looked back. Then climb vertically. That's not an instruction. That's a threat. Good. The 3 men began scaling the final cliff. Bare hands. Frozen rock. Storm howling like a monster. A bullet ripped past Hensley's ear. He almost lost his grip. Hensley, hold! Diaz roared. I am holding. Hold harder. That's not how holding works. Rourke snapped. Quit talking! They climbed in silence. Only breathing and gunfire in the storm. Mira breaks cover. A grenade landed near Mira. Her eyes widened. She dove behind a glacier rock just as it detonated, blasting snow into the air and throwing her onto her side. Her ribs screamed in pain. Her ears rang. Her vision blurred. The insurgents advanced now, seeing their chance. One shouted, Kill her before the Americans reach the top! Boots thudded on ice. Rifles raised. Mira forced herself up. She stumbled, slid on the ice. Then steadied. No! She growled. She fired again. Hitting one, grazing another. But there were too many. They fanned out, surrounding her. She took a step back. Foot touching open air behind her. The cliff edge. One misstep would send her falling 11,000 feet. The lead insurgent leveled his rifle at her chest. You die now. Myra's breathing slowed. She tightened her grip. And then, a shadow appeared behind him. A hand grabbed the insurgent's collar and yanked him back. He barely had time to scream before he was hurled off the mountain. Myra's eyes widened. Rourke! Captain Rourke climbed onto the peak, pulling himself up with raw fury. Snow clung to his beard. His jacket was torn. His knuckles were bleeding. But he stood tall. A storm inside the storm. He didn't say a word. He just charged. Diaz and Hensley scrambled up after him, roaring as they tackled the next 2 insurgents. Gunfire erupted all over the peak. Mira dropped to one knee, firing at another hostile trying to flank Rourke. The man fell. Rourke slammed his shoulder into another enemy and drove him into the rock wall. Diaz threw a punch that knocked a rifle out of a man's hands, then kicked him into the snow. Hensley dodged a knife strike and smashed the attacker with the butt of his rifle. It was chaos. Wind, snow, bullets, screams. A battle fought on a knife's edge at 11,000 feet. The last hostile. The final insurgent grabbed Mira from behind, arm locking around her throat. Rourke spun. Too far away. Mira! She didn't panic. She didn't hesitate. She drove her elbow back. Once, twice. Then hooked her leg behind his and dropped her weight. They fell together. She twisted midair. And slammed him into the ground first. He didn't get back up. Mira stood slowly, breath ragged. The peak was silent again. Rourke approached, snow whipping around him. "You're freezing," he said. "You climbed Grey Farm without ropes," she replied. He shrugged. "I wasn't leaving you here." Her voice cracked. "You should have waited for the storm to clear." Rourke shook his head. "You're Ranger family. We don't wait. We move." The two stood on the peak as the storm finally began to calm, snow settling around them like ash after a battle. Mira looked down the mountain. The impossible climb they had survived. She whispered, voice trembling. "You mad idiots. You actually made it." Diaz laughed behind her. "Of course we did. We're Rangers." The sun broke through the clouds, shining across the frozen peak. The hardest part was over. Or so they thought. For a full minute, the peak was silent. No wind. No bullets. Only exhausted breathing and the low rumble of the dying storm. Mira leaned against a rock, her legs trembling from cold and adrenaline. Rourke stepped beside her, placing his jacket around her shoulders. It was warm. Heavy. Familiar. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Better than I should be." Diaz kicked a frozen rifle off the edge of the cliff. "Storm's letting up. We can head down before we turn into statues." But Hensley had gone unnaturally still. He was staring down the north face of the mountain. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," he muttered. Rourke joined him. And his jaw tightened. A convoy. Armored trucks. Bright headlights cutting through the fading storm. 2 technicals with mounted guns. Enemy reinforcements. Dozens of them. They'd seen the gunfire on the peak. They were coming to finish what the insurgents started. Diaz exhaled slowly. "We're trapped." Rourke shook his head. "No. We've been trapped before." He turned to the team. "Gear check. Ammo check. Move. We're getting Mira off this mountain. The descent begins." The Rangers moved quickly, spreading out in a loose column. Mira stayed in the middle, flanked by Diaz and Hensley. Rourke led the front, carving the safest path down the icy cliff. Every step was a gamble. One slip equals fatal fall. One loud sound equals enemy fire from below. Myra's muscles were stiff. Her fingers were numb. Her face burned with cold. But she followed them. Every ranger step carved into the snow was a promise. "You're not alone. Not anymore." Halfway down the ridge, Diaz raised a fist. Everyone froze. Voices below. Engines rumbling. Boots crunching snow. Lights sweeping the cliffs. They were setting up a blockade. Rourke whispered, "Take cover behind the wall. Nobody move." The team pressed against a jagged rock face. Myra's breathing grew shallow. She could see her own heartbeat pulsing in the cut above her eyebrow. 2 enemy scouts climbed within meters of them. Pausing. Listening. Searching. Mira felt her throat tighten. If even one of them looked up. One scout's boot slipped, dislodging a chunk of ice. It tumbled toward the ranger's ledge. Rourke caught it midair with both hands. Pure reflex. Muffling the sound. The scouts didn't notice. They moved on. The rangers exhaled silently in unison. The blockade ahead. As they descended further, Mira peered over the next cliff. Her stomach sank. Below them, on the lower ridge, the reinforcements had set up a literal wall. Multiple trucks blocking the path. 2 mounted guns pointed up the mountain. Dozens of men scanning the slope. Diaz whispered, "We're boxed in. There's no way down." Rourke didn't blink. "There's another way." Mira looked at him sharply. "There's no other path on Grey Farm." "There is," he said. "It's just not a path we use." He pointed to the western drop, a steep, snow-covered chute plunging nearly vertical. Hensley blanched. "That thing is a death slide." Diaz groaned. "That's the avalanche chute, sir. We trained to avoid it. Nobody survives that route." Rourke looked at Mira. "You think you can hold on?" Her lips curled into a tired smile. "You climbed this mountain for me. I'll slide down 100 times if I have to. Rourke nodded. That's my ranger. The avalanche chute. Snow hammered the chute like an angry river. Loose ice. Hidden rocks. Sheer speed. Rourke went first, digging his hands into the snow, letting gravity pull him like a controlled fall. Diaz next. Then Hensley. Mira swallowed hard. Here goes everything. She leaned back. And the mountain grabbed her. Wind roared past her ears. Snow exploded around her. Her heart hammered as she shot downward, sliding fast enough to lose control. Then a shadow appeared beside her. Rourke. He matched her speed, using his boots like anchors. Lean left! Use the snowbank! Mira leaned. Her slide slowed. Just enough. She hit the lower drift and rolled, landing hard but alive. Diaz and Hensley crashed beside them. The Rangers lay there for a moment, breathing in the cold air, stunned but unbroken. Hensley coughed. I will never complain about stair runs again. Diaz groaned. I'm pretty sure I left my spine up there. Mira laughed, weak, breathless, but real. You guys are insane. Rourke helped her to her feet. We learned from the best. The escape fire. A shout rang out. The reinforcements had spotted them. Lights swung toward them. Engines revved. Men shouted commands. Rourke tightened his grip on Myra's arm. Move! They sprinted across the lower ridge toward the tree line where rescue could be possible. Gunfire ripped through the snow around them. Hensley returned fire. Diaz threw smoke. Rourke pulled Mira behind a boulder as bullets shattered the ice nearby. The Rangers fought their way toward the woods. Step by step. Burst by burst. Never letting the enemy get close. Finally, they reached the first line of trees. Dark. Dense. Safe. Helicopter rotors thundered in the distance. Extraction. Rourke looked back at the mountain. Gray, brutal, towering like a monster swallowed in fog. Then he looked at Mira. You held that peak alone, he said quietly. She met his eyes. And you climbed the impossible. Diaz limped into view. Hey, nobody's writing poetry. Get in the helo before they shoot us again. The Rangers helped Mira aboard. The helicopter lifted. Snow kicked up in a storm beneath it. Mira watched gray fog fade behind them. Cold. Cruel. Unforgiving. But she wasn't afraid of it anymore. Because on the day they left her to die, her Rangers climbed without ropes, without fear, without hesitation. For her. She whispered into the roar of the rotors. No Ranger left behind. I finally understand. The team smiled around her. Family. Brothers. Home. The helo turned east, carrying them away from the mountain that tried to break them. And failed.